I have raised cattle for 22 years. In 22 years, you develop a relationship with livestock that people who have not done it find difficult to understand. You know their patterns, their sounds, the specific behavior of an animal that is content versus one that is distressed versus one that is alert to something you cannot yet see. Cattle are not expressive in the way of dogs or horses, but they are observant, and they communicate what they observe in ways that a person with 22 years of watching them can read. On a June night, I woke at 2:30 in the morning to the cattle. Not bellowing, not the distressed sound of an animal in pain. The specific, sustained, low vocalization my cattle made when something was present in their environment that was wrong. I had heard it twice in 22 years before that night. Once when a coyote got into the south pasture. Once when a stranger's dog came through the fence line. I knew what that sound meant. I got up. I did not go outside immediately. I looked through my bedroom window at the yard between the house and the barn, about 150 feet away, with the pasture gate to the left of it. My motion-activated light on the barn's exterior was on. Something had triggered it. I watched. At the edge of the light, just at the boundary where the light gave way to darkness, I could see a shape. Still, not an animal shape, an upright shape. A person, standing at the edge of the light, looking at the barn. I picked up my phone and called 911. I gave the dispatcher my address and said there was a person standing at the edge of my barn light at 2:30 in the morning, that I was on a cattle farm and my animals had woken me, and that I needed a deputy. She said a unit was being dispatched and asked if the person was still there. I looked. The shape was moving, not toward the house but toward the pasture gate, toward my cattle. I told her and she said to stay inside and that the unit was 12 minutes out. I stayed inside and watched from the window. The motion light tracked movement, going off and on as whatever was out there moved through and out of its range. I tracked it as best I could. At the pasture gate the light triggered again, then went dark, then triggered once more on the far side of the barn, moving around the perimeter. Learning it, the sheriff's unit arrived in 14 minutes. They swept the property and found no one present. But at the pasture gate there was fresh ground disturbance and marks consistent with someone spending time at the latch. At the back of the property, near the fence line where the pasture backed up to a county road, a vehicle had been parked on the gravel shoulder. Tire impressions, fresh, gone before the deputy arrived, but recent enough to be clear in the damp ground. The deputy said cattle theft was a significant problem in that county and across the state. What I had had that night was someone casing the operation, learning the layout, the lock, the gate, where the animals were. My cattle had woken me, the light had confirmed it, and I had called before going outside. That sequence was what kept it from being something worse. He said they would probably come back since operations like this returned, when they thought the first visit went undetected. He told me to set a camera on that gate, and to call them every single time. I set cameras on the gate, the barn front, and the road-facing fence line within the week. I also established a protocol with 2 neighboring farms that if any of us saw unusual activity, we called each other and the sheriff simultaneously. Because a farm network is faster than waiting for the county alone. And because the animals had been right. They were always right. I just had never had to rely on them at 2:30 in the morning before. Listen to your animals. Before you understand why. They already know. I farm 600 acres of corn and soybeans in central Illinois. I want you to understand what that means in practical terms before I tell you what happened. 600 acres means equipment combines planters, tractors, a grain cart, a semi with a grain trailer. Equipment representing several $100,000 of investment that sits in a metal shed at the east end of my property when it is not in the field. The shed is about 300 feet from the house. I lock it, a heavy padlock on the main door, and a secondary cable lock on the side entrance. Standard. In October, the height of harvest, I was running a full schedule. In the field by 6 in the morning, finishing after dark. The kind of schedule that leaves you with exactly enough energy to eat and sleep and start again. On a Wednesday in the middle of harvest, I noticed the padlock on the main shed door was different. Not gone, not broken, different. Same brand, same color, same general appearance. But different. I noticed because I am someone who notices specific things about the equipment I depend on. The padlock I had been using on that door for 3 years had a particular scratch on the body from a time I dropped it on concrete. a distinctive diagonal scratch on the right side. The scratch was not there. The padlock on my door was not my padlock. It was one that looked like mine. Someone had replaced my lock with their own. I stood at that door in the October morning light and processed what that meant. My lock removed, their lock installed, which meant they had a key, and I did not. I called my neighbor first, the man 3/4 of a mile west who had farmed this area his whole life, and who I trusted completely. He came over in 15 minutes, looked at the lock, and said not to try to open it and not to go in, and to call the sheriff right now. I called the Macon County Sheriff. A deputy arrived in 22 minutes. He examined the lock, called for a second unit and a bolt cutter, and before cutting the lock he walked the perimeter of the shed. At the back, a section of the metal siding had been modified. Not recently and not quickly. A section of the lower siding had been carefully removed and reattached with screws that could be backed out from the outside with a standard driver. A removable panel. A secondary entrance that was invisible unless you were looking for it. The deputy said he wanted 2 officers before they went in. The second unit arrived, and they entered. The shed held all my equipment, present and undamaged. But in the far back corner behind the grain cart, in a space not visible from the door, they found what the shed had been holding beyond my equipment. I am not going to describe in full detail what was stored there. What I will tell you is that the items were consistent with a staging operation, someone using my shed as a location for the storage and transfer of property that was not theirs and that had come from multiple locations across the region. Equipment theft in rural Illinois had been escalating for 2 years. My shed, locked, remote, on a road that saw almost no traffic, had been identified as a transfer point. The investigation connected it to a theft ring operating across 4 counties. The deputy who led the investigation said the lock switch was the tell. They take your lock so they have the only key. You notice it is wrong and cannot get in. You assume you lost your key. You get a bolt cutter or call a locksmith. And by the time you get inside, whatever was there has been moved. He said I had noticed the scratch. And that scratch was what broke the case open. Know your locks. Not the brand. The specific lock. The scratch, the wear pattern, the exact weight of it in your hand. Know it well enough to know when it has been replaced. Because the replacement is the tell. And the tell is everything. Every farm has a back 40. Maybe not literally 40 acres. But every farm has a section of the property that is furthest from the house. The section you get to last. The section that goes the longest between visits. The section of your land you know least well in any given week. Mine was the timber section. 22 acres of second-growth hardwood at the back of my property in Missouri. I ran cattle on the front 100 acres. The timber section was behind a fence line accessible through a gate, and I went back there maybe once a month. To check the fence, to look for downed timber, to walk the land that was mine even if I did not work it daily. On an October morning, I went back to check the timber fence after a week of high winds. I parked at the gate and walked in. The east fence was fine. The north had one post that had shifted, which I marked to come back to with equipment. On the west side near the creek that ran through the back of the timber, I found the first sign. A trail. Not a deer trail, not the random meandering path of an animal moving through undergrowth. A trail that had been walked repeatedly. The ground compressed, the undergrowth pushed back on both sides, the kind of trail a person makes over multiple trips, leading from the fence line, at a low point where crossing the creek was possible, deeper into my timber. I did not follow it. I stood at the beginning of it and looked at where it went. Into my land. My back 40. I called the Missouri State Highway Patrol from where I was standing. The trooper asked me to describe what I had found. I described the trail, the fence crossing point at the creek, the direction it led. He said not to follow it, to mark my location with my phone GPS and walk back to my vehicle, and that a unit would meet me at the gate. I walked back. 2 troopers arrived in 20 minutes and went into the timber. They were back in 45 minutes. What they found at the end of the trail, approximately 3/4 of a mile into my timber, was a camp. Not a recreational or hunter's camp. A sustained and structured camp with evidence of long-term occupation. Multiple shelter structures built from timber materials. A cache of supplies consistent with someone prepared to remain in that location for an extended period. A fire ring that had been used many times, cold ash layered over older cold ash over older ash still. A recorded history of fires going back considerably. and evidence in the arrangement of the camp and in the sight lines from its elevated position that whoever built it had a clear view through the tree line to my farm buildings, my house, and my routines. The troopers estimated based on the fire ring evidence that the camp had been occupied and unoccupied on a rotating basis over what could have been months. My back 40 had been occupied for an extended period without my knowledge while I went about my farm work 1,000 feet away. The investigation was extensive. The camp was documented, processed, and dismantled. No arrest was made. The individual had not been present during any of the law enforcement visits and was not subsequently identified. The case remains open. The lead investigator said something I think about every time I walk my property now. He said a farm property of any significant size has sections that go weeks between a landowner's visits, and those sections are known to be infrequently visited, not by me, but by someone who has been watching. The back of my property was not less mine because I visited it less, but it was more available to misuse because I visited it less. He said to walk all of it regularly, not to find something, but to make my presence known on every part of my land, and to know what the land looked like when everything was right so I could see when something was not. Walk all of it regularly, your whole property, not just the working sections, the back 40, the timber, the section you have not been to in 3 weeks. Walk it. Your presence is what makes misuse difficult. Your absence is what makes it possible.